Good evening, everybody out there. We've got a special guest tonight, high performance coach, transformational coach, Colin Bell. I've known him for a long while now. Fantastic guy, really knowledgeable guy. He works with world-class athletes. He works with the corporate sector. He works with people who want to achieve goals from reducing weight right through to improving their athletic performance, to improving themselves and their mindset, to perform in corporate sector, and just generally help people be the best they can be. Colin, great to have you on board this evening. Tell us a bit about what you do.
Great, good to see you, Jim. Thanks for that kind intro.
Yeah.
So yeah, in a nutshell, I think you hit a few of the topics there. I started out as a performance coach. My background was predominantly in the sports side of things, and over the last 7, 8 years, I've taken on a few more dynamics in terms of what I do, and there are primarily sort of 4 areas that I work within, and they cover energy. I do work in and around movement, exercise, these type of things, nutrition, diet, weight loss, sport-specific eating programs, and then the final part of the work that I do is in and around the mindset, and then putting all that together.
Yeah, it's really fascinating what you do, and you combine a lot of concepts and elements. One thing I know for sure, having known you for a long while now, is that you're very, in my opinion anyway, methodical and professional. You leave no stone unturned. There's a lot of attention to detail. And I find that in the athletic world, in the sporting world, as no doubt you're well aware, that you're looking for those marginal gains, those minimal improvements, because the fine line in the highest level of sport between being the best and being, you know, the 50th best in the world, it can be 1%, and you can quantify that by, if you take 1% off of time in, say, cycling or sprinting or one of those disciplines, then you don't end up on the Olympic team, but you go 1% higher, then you're a medalist. So it's quite marginal. And one thing that I feel that you do really well is you've transferred that concept to life in general. Can you tell us a bit more how you help people who, for example, we've got people watching this evening, ranging from people in the corporate sector, people looking to improve their physical well-being, people looking to reduce some weight, but how do you transfer these concepts to everyday life and corporate sector?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I think perhaps putting a bit more meat on the bone in and around the marginal gains for anybody that's perhaps not come across that. The concept, if anybody's not new to that, was I think it became very popular in and around a term that was coined from somebody within British cycling. And as it suggests, and as you say there, it's the difference, isn't it? It's a small amount of difference that can have a huge impact. And clearly, in a cycling and a sports term, British cycling had a lot of success because of applying this notion of a marginal gain, a small change that would have a huge impact. So being in and around cycling as I've been for some years, I suppose I choose to look at it that I modeled or I took certain aspects of what they were doing, their coaching, their strategies, their systems, and the other side to the coin, I suppose, with my background, perhaps to give a little bit more context, prior to going through the career change that I did, I used to work in the corporate sector for just over 10 years in the digital media game. So within that, my lifestyle was very different. It was a very sedentary lifestyle. It was not necessarily the healthiest lifestyle. It came with an element of stress. My diet wasn't particularly great. So I suppose I was my own experiment. And while I was working within that industry, I was a manager, I was a head of a lot online and different roles. But there were 2 things that stood out, I suppose, in terms of my own performance and how I could be better at what I did. And the other aspect was how I could help my team and the people that I work with do the same thing. So that was really the start of my journey in terms of, well, how can we explore this? And to long answer to your question there, how do I now work with clients in and around the corporate sector to take some of these aspects of sport? And I mean, this is nothing new. I'm not suggesting that I'm doing anything that hasn't been done or isn't done in wide abundance. But I've taken my own experiences with working with athletes, teams, individual athletes, my own experiments, my own experiences. And through primarily experimentation, I've been very fortunate that I've worked with a real cross section of individuals, both from the sporting side and the corporate sector. And I've had the opportunity to do a lot of experiment with them. They've been open to, because for me, one of the most important things in all of this that I took on board at the very early stages of my coaching career is that this is an experiment of one. So regardless of what might be the right thing for my colleague or my teammate or whoever, it doesn't necessarily mean it's right for me. It doesn't mean it's the wrong thing, but it might not just be quite the right fit for me. So I ran with this quite early, and I've always stuck to this, and it's something I share with people that I work with, because, and probably yourself and other coaches, I find that when people come to do coaching with me, they come quite, I don't want to say, they've got a sort of fixed mind, but they come with a view that this is the program, this is the route, this is what everybody does and has the success, so therefore I should, and if I don't, then the issue is me. And what we try and do, we try and break that down slightly to say, well, maybe the issue isn't, the program or yourself. It's a mixture of the two. So it's the openness to experiment and to say, well, okay, well, we can take the best bits of this and the best bits of that. And it just is. It's a journey, as people said. I don't think that the mind that we all have to do what everyone else does because it fits or it's the right program. And that's not saying it's the wrong program, but it's just finding the right fit. So how I've combined sport and the particular, I've had the fortune to work with a real mix of different sports to I suppose, take the best bits and share those with people and personal experiences and form this hybrid program, if you will.
Yeah, that's really fascinating stuff. And in my experience, Colin, and anyone watching out there, I tend to find that when we talk about sport, we talk about utilizing the mindset in sport and utilizing some of the techniques and strategies in sport and transferring them to everyday life and transferring them to corporate sector. The concepts, the strategies, the way things are done on a fine level, a marginal level, and attention to detail level at the very highest level of sport. Sometimes people sort of interpret that as being, for example, they struggle sometimes with the concept that you're adopting sporting methods. I sometimes get the people saying to me, well, I've never played sport, I'm not really into sport. They kind of mistake the concept that I'm referring to. So I tend to break it down and marginalize it in a way they understand. Now, for me, you mentioned energy. That's quite fascinating. And it's really fascinating because we know nutrition and what a part that plays in how we feel and so on and so forth, eating foods in high nutritional values. And we know that sleep is a big part of it too. There's a lot of things that we do know anyway. The other thing I was going to say to you as well in terms of energy, what I find fascinating is our reaction to certain events that happen in life, and the way one way to understand it is this way. Imagine you're in a situation, anyone out there listening, and if you can sort of interpret this in your own way and define how you would use this concept in your profession. But imagine you have a long day at work. You have a really long day at work, okay? And you've got in mind to go training in the evening. You've had this really long, hard day at work. And then as you get home, you get in and you go about doing your stuff that you do when you get in, and a bit of tidying, and you cook or you might eat something. Then you open the mail. And within the mail, you get a letter. Let's say you're applying for another job. Let's say you were applying to go to uni. Let's say you sent you were waiting for some news, and the news wasn't good. You didn't get into uni. You didn't get that job. Immediately, the way the mind would work is this resignation. You see sometimes people withdraw, and as they withdraw, they make comforty from an emotional point of view, and then they hibernate for the rest of the evening and just stagnate, really. Ultimately, the other end of the scale is that, let's say you have a long day at work and so on and so forth, and you're knackered and you're tired, and you get home and you're mentally drained and physically tired, and you apply for that uni or you've applied for that job, and you guess it. Regardless of how tired you are, we know we've got that second wind. We know you're not going to slump and withdraw socially. We know you're going to go out there, want to share the news, and you're going to find that second wind to train. You probably won't sleep. And what I find fascinating is that it's the mindset. It's our reaction. Now, there's not, if we're going to esoteric, nothing means anything other than we give meaning to. But ultimately, in the end, that we find that we've got these implicit associations in our mind, and that we know in the limbic system, to cut a long story short, and we associate one thing with the other. But ultimately, the way I see it is, okay, a high performer, Colin, a high performer, as you all know, regardless of what the situation is, most of the time, they're going to get on with the goal, the outcome. And I find setting goals is a huge part. And one of the reasons I think it's really important to set goals is to be able to look beyond the situation and navigate to where you want to go and get that energy, that vibration, that we're not reacting, we're not going into situations where we're waiting for the world to be how we want it to be. We're assertive and we're moving forward, because we can all find reasons and results. We can all find reasons why we succeed, reasons why we don't succeed. We can all justify results one way or the other. How do you define the energy part about what you do, and sort of making sense of what I said then about how certain people in certain situations be reactive? What's your take on that situation, Colin?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it there, Jim, and a lot of those points resonate with me. I think for me, when I introduced the concept of energy, straight away people think, we're going to start doing some bouncing around, jumping type of thing, and clearly there's a place for that. And in some offices and places, it's well received, whereas others, it's not for everybody. But really, the ideas in and around energy that I talk about are, I suppose, they're a mixture of the sporting and physical aspects. So we look at things, again, not to go into too much detail here and now, but we look at our natural rhythms. So most people are probably familiar with circadian and ultradian rhythms that we operate on this 24-hour clock, and our bodies, have. And most people are aware of these things now, because this information has been out there for a while. But we look at peaks and troughs throughout the day, because the theory is that we can, most of us are pulsing. There isn't a linear process through the day that most people can control and say, well, I'm going to be energetic for these 4 hours, or pick where and when. As you say, there are certain physical responses and stimuli to certain events, but on a given work day, for example, working with an organization, picking a very random 9 to 5, most people will, for one, just as a side note, which is quite relevant, I suppose, we're the only animal on the planet that sleeps once a day. Whether there's reason or what, if that's a good or a bad thing, and there are obviously outliers to that, because there are some people who experiment with sleep patterns, but where did this notion come from that we should only sleep once a day? That's a societal impact, that we sleep in this one block of sleep at the end of the day. There is science and there is reason for that, but there are also people who would say, well, biologically, we're not wired. We're not, if you look at it and compare us to animals, and you look at the way, yes, obviously that there are big differences, but if you look at the way we have to manage our energy and get through the day, there are issues in and around that clearly we can't sustain this high output throughout the day. We're not a computer as much as we're perhaps heading that way. We don't have the ability to do it. So we look at perhaps a person's working day. We look at assigning key tasks to key energy levels, because most people in theory would have a rough idea. People might say, I'm a night person, I'm a morning person, or people often talk about this mid-afternoon slump, and a lot of people would associate, well, after lunch, is it the food, is it the digestive process that's making me tired, or in theory, is that the block of time between 12 and 3 that my body would really like to sleep? Yourself, people who travel a lot, and you look at other cultures, why is it that the siesta is still as popular and impactful as it is? You look at countries and culture in Asia, sleep and different patterns and experiments around sleep to get the most out of our day, not just in terms of performance, but also in terms of health maintenance. Sleep has so many beneficial impacts, as you say. It will have an impact on diet. It will have impact potentially on those people that are involved in sport, working people, parents. And yes, you know, we can't always choose an ideal, but I think having, you know, more information and more ideas around sleep and how to manage our energy on a given day will allow us to be essentially more effective, you know, better at what we're doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. And certainly with my clients, Colin, certainly with my clients, particularly ones who've got anxiety and issues around performance, the first thing I go for is sleep hygiene. Yeah. That's one of the first things I target, is to make sure that they're getting and managing their energy levels. And I think you said something there really fascinating, and I think that's a key takeaway for anyone watching this evening, assigning tasks, key tasks, because I think that we don't have our game head on. Sometimes we end up in situations where we're going into situations where we're not psychologically ready for it. The mindset's not there. And specifically, let's say you've got to answer emails and you're answering them, say, at midnight, or you're answering first thing in the morning, then you're at your most vulnerable. So if you've got a backlog of emails, it would make sense to answer them when you are psychologically in a good emotional state to answer to the best of your ability. Let's say you customer services and you have to reply to people, it makes sense to email them at a certain time of day. It could be that assigning a task to do a presentation. We do that present. Now, we don't always have there's constraints. We can't always pick and choose when we do what we do. But what you can do is then be able to understand yourself better and adapt to the situation. Because if you know you're doing a big presentation, say 7 in the evening, then it might mean you go to bed early or a bit later. Now, when I used to work in sport, I still work in sport now, but not as much as I used to do. When I was working in youth development, and I was working overseeing performance at a football club, what I would do with the under 18s, because they'd start at 10 o'clock they'd play on a Saturday, 11 o'clock in the morning, and I would make sure that they were all in bed by 9. And the reason being is that I want them to be awake for minimum 5 hours before the kickoff, and I'd want them to sleep 8 hours. So it's okay, can we get to bed as early as you can and get that 7 hours of sleep? Because if you think about people watching out there, let's say you try and lift a weight, bench press a weight when you first wake up in the morning, and then bench press that weight 5 hours later, the likelihood is going to be stronger later. So it's giving the nervous system time to kick in, really. And we found that it worked really, really well, and we had far more energy, far stronger, and there's sort of margin looking at that level of sport. Same thing I did at first team level. I'd get sometimes training sessions at, say, 7:45 in the evening, and the reason being is we knew we were going to play then. I thought, so if you're watching a soap in the evening and you're not used to it, it's that shock to the system. So I'd look at ways to go like for like and help the body to adapt. And not easy as it used to be these days, because years gone by, 3 o'clock kickoff around the board, now you got different times. But I'd make sure, Colin, that we do that in sport. And I brought that to the corporation too, and looked at ways that we could structure the day and assign key tasks to key people to be able to get maximum effort. Now, it wasn't always practical, because sometimes you had to fit in with organizations, but to make sure key people were in the right place at the right time. And we look for techniques to raise their mental game, so they get into a situation and bang, you get 100% out of the person, the individual. Because if someone's got a presentation at 9 in the morning, it would make sense for them to get bed earlier than what they'd normally do. But you know that if they've got it late in the afternoon, and then you can plan accordingly. I don't know if that's what you do with assigning key tasks or how you do it, but my suspicion is you're going to have something similar, if not, something unique that you can share to people listening, watching.
Yeah, very similar, really. Very similar in, as you say, trying almost to. And again, I go back to the point of the experiment of one. There isn't a rule to say at 12 we should all this, or at 1 everybody should, because that clearly doesn't work. And the body's such an amazing instrument. I definitely try not to take it for granted, but I do, and I think we all do until it goes wrong. But it's an amazingly intuitive instrument, and if we ask, it'll answer. So most people are intuitive enough to know, yes, these are the times when I tend to flag on a daily basis, or that's the time when I've got tons of energy or struggle late at night, so I get things done in the morning. I think it really struck with me, working in quite a creative field that I did previously. that just it was clearly disjointed, that you would ask people who, you know, designers and lots of creative people to be sat at their desk at 9 o'clock in the morning because it conformed to working hours. And these people typically are up till 3, 4 in the morning because they're creative, working the designing, and that's their time, that's their optimal time. So then to ask them to come in and be sat at the desk and on point, it didn't work. And perhaps it started resonating with me then that there must be more effective and efficient ways to do that. And I mean, that's one particular industry, but I've seen it in others. I've had the fortune to work with people, which is particularly, I suppose, challenging, shift workers, you know, NHS staff and people who circumstances dictate when they have to. So they perhaps have to, by their own admission, have to be doubly smart or in tune with listening to the body and taking breaks where and when they can, and doing all the other things to compensate, extra hydration and things, as you know, around breathing and the foods and striking that balance. But it's just knowing, really, because we would all be able to identify when we've not had enough sleep. We can buffer it. Again, the body's so amazing. We could all, you know, have a 3 or 4, 5, however many days and think, yeah, I've had a few late nights, but as you say, if adrenaline's driving enough for the reason to do it, or circumstances dictate, we're new parents, yeah, that's a challenge, and there's no ideal in and around that. But over a longer period of time, when we look at it, it's thinking about ways to say, well, day to day, how can I ultimately create the most effective architecture for my day?
That's really interesting stuff. Yeah, no, definitely. That's really interesting. And I say it's interesting. I'll give an example where what tends to happen is, I'm going to use an example, I think, that sort of drawing attention to what you're saying, and I think it's fascinating. And the reason being is that most people won't notice. And if I take this piece of paper and you can see the piece of paper, I can rip a piece and you probably won't notice a great deal. I rip another one, you still probably won't notice a great deal. I rip another one, I rip another one, and eventually you end up in a mess. And I think most people, yeah, they can find ways of means, but it's like the knock on the door. You hear the knock on the door, and you don't answer it, and it gets louder and louder. The mind and the body will tell you if you're aware of it, and the mind will tell you. There's a telltale signs. I'm not to say everyone's going to be affected the same way. It's not to say everyone's going to, you know, fall to pieces, but we do know that anxiety is getting huge in the workplace, and people are struggling. And I think that that's linked to many things, and there's things that are beyond what we're talking about this evening, yet there's a lot of people too that through sleep, through poor dieting, through their routine, through their rituals are affected. And it's really interesting you say, and I remember once, Colin, I was doing some work at a corporate sector, and I came in with a big green juice. I had green juice in the morning, and they said to me, what the hell is that? And I said, well, I like to put cucumber and greens and the high alkaline. My goal is to go as high alkaline as I can. I like, you know, other things to have a balance. Yeah, in saying that, the first thing I do in the morning, my ritual is to have a smoothie. And I brought one in, as you do and as one does in situation. And they're like, what the hell is that? I said, well, this is what it is. And one of them said to me, I need 4 or 5 cups of coffee to function before I can even get out of the front door. And I said, you need 4 or 5 cups of coffee. Now, I don't mind a cup of coffee myself, 2 or 3 during the day sometimes. It all depends. Yet, what really surprised me is that this guy said that he needs 4 or 5. And I said, if you slept for 8 hours, dude, if you slept 8 hours and the first thing you need is a cup of coffee to get going, you've got some serious problems, man. Yeah. If you, if you've gone to bed at 10 and you're up at say 7 or 8 and you need 4 or 5 cups to get out that day, there's got to be something seriously wrong. And the only thing I can think of is that either you're not eating well, you're in that spiral of dependency, or ultimately you just don't have the passion for the work that you do. Because if you're passionate about what you do, you send a signal to the brain where you're motivated. And that's why it's really important, I think, to find work you love doing. But not everyone's got the luxury of doing that, but we can aim to do that. But we know that, like I mentioned earlier, that when you go home, if you get a letter in the post, if it's a good letter, you find that second wind. So if you get up in the morning, you go into where you want to go, you're motivated. And you used a great example when you used to work in the environment before, and the one you work now and have been working for a while, it's a whole new spring to the step. But ultimately, in the end, it's fascinating. And what's your take on that? People getting up in the morning, and is it their mindset? Is it their nutrition? Is it all things of the above? Is it where do you go from there? And you think that throughout the course of the day, in terms of productivity and their own well-being, and even before we look at staff absenteeism, even before we look at people underperforming, even before we look at any of that, let's look at functionality from a personal point of view, from a social point of view, life in general, quality of life. Where do you go from there, Colin? Where do you go from there? You've got someone in a situation like that where they're having to caffeine fix, they're having to find stimulants throughout the day to keep themselves going and distract themselves from the reality of the situation they're in.
Yeah, and that's a real example for me. I mean, probably thinking about it when I was in my previous career, that to a point was probably me. and I don't mind admitting that. And I tell people I work with from the get-go, all the experimentation, and I've used myself as my own guinea pig with a lot of this. I've probably been where they are, in that at quite a young age, I had real issues with sleep on and off. I just couldn't switch this is what I told myself anyway, I couldn't switch my brain off to get to sleep. It wasn't the sleep itself. I believe that the issue was, for me, was being able to switch off. There were too many things I wanted to think about, and I couldn't, or didn't know then how to manage that. And that's quite a common thing that I hear and I see. And a lot of the research and the studies talk about, obviously now, particularly with technology, and there are obviously any number of factors that impact that. But yeah, to an extent, I and the people I was working with, and many of my clients now, talk about the caffeine diet or the energy drinks, and when we think about that, and thinking about my own experiment, and use me as the case study within that, it basically, it's a never-ending cycle, because you were, or I was, using the energy drinks or the caffeine to elevate and stimulate me to a level where I believed I needed to be. But logic would suggest what goes up, it's got to come down. And, so what do? Drink more coffee, more Red Bull, and more Lucozade. There's a point where that has to stop, and all the other impacts and side effects in terms of the sugar and all the other things. And for me, who, I essentially got fed up with that sleeping pattern, because anyone who will know who has sleep issues, I think 1 in 3, 1 in 4 nowadays, people are fighting or struggling or working, having to deal with some sleep issue. And the dietary impact, as you say, is a big part of that. And people, when I first start working with them, will say to me, and in some cases it's genuine, shift workers, or people with new babies, or people with demanding shift patterns or jobs that don't allow them, for me, just to come in and say, these are the hours that you should sleep, and it'll all be perfect, and this is the Disney version. And I'm realistic enough to know that that's not the case. It's about, well, where do we start? And ultimately, as you say, what's driving us? What's pulling us toward it, or pushing us away from? Why is it that I couldn't shut my brain off late at night? Was there a reason? Or somebody, as you say, who comes and says, well, I need to get going with all this caffeine. Is that simply because they've not had enough sleep? And then we start chunking all these things to say, and you used the term before, sleep hygiene. And it's not just about being in bed, is it, for 10, 12, 8, 6 hours? It's the quality of your sleep within that period. And there are, more and more research studies conducted and evidence to suggest that we can create an optimal sleep pattern or hygiene for ourselves. Again, it's different for different people: temperature, lighting, screen usage before bed, eating times before bed, hydration. There are any number of different factors. And again, it's bringing it back to say, well, it's an experiment. So let's, through process of elimination, let's play around with some of these things. If we remove some things, we can isolate potentially where the challenge is for the individual. But if people come with a view that, that's not going to work for them, then clearly, as with anybody, if it's not right, it's not the right time, they're not going to embrace these things. So they need to come with a willingness to say, look, I've had enough of this, just been tired all the time. It's getting me down, which it does, having been there. I need to change this, and I'm willing to try anything. So process of elimination, and that's the route I took. I took caffeine, just using me again as the example for anybody. Caffeine was a good place to start, so I gradually reduced it. And again, probably because of the nature of the job that I did, it was very social, and drinking coffee all day was just what we did. And and I just gradually, not a sudden withdrawal, no caffeine, no drinks, because for most people that doesn't work either. And that's how I sort of advise and work with people to suggest, just small changes regularly, and let's track things. It becomes almost a science experiment or a sports experiment. We need some type of measure to see, and we need to be willing to do this over a period of time. Not to say that the first thing will be right. Caffeine removal might not work. So what else could it be? And it's that, because I don't think any of us are finished, and I think it's a work in progress, and an openness to experiment with these things, and to look at the research and look at the studies and the people that have been looking at this for a long time, and look at some basic science, but again, bring it back to us, the understanding of what is it for me, and being open to why do I need to do it.
For sure, and it's got a knock-on effect really as well, isn't it? Because when you think about it, I know you do a lot of great work with people in the fitness industry too, and people who come along to see you, ranging from weight reduction to helping them to focus more, helping them to set goals, helping them to build the emotional intelligence, and it has a knock-on effect, I think, anyway. And I think one of the biggest things is people, if they feel good about themselves, if they get themselves in shape physically too, it has a knock-on effect. I think now, one of the analogies I use is, it's not easy. We always fluctuate. There's no perfect situation, and I fully have empathy for people who end up in situations who we can all, it could happen to anybody really. It's not easy. So I've been there myself, where not always on top form, but I know you do what people with weight reduction. And one of the things I look at, and we're not saying to be any other weight other than what's comfortable for you. But the thing is, Colin, if I was to sort of like put, this weighs about 5 kilograms or 10 kilograms even. Now, if I was to carry this on my shoulder all day, every day, and I was to take it off, carrying on my shoulder is going to take a lot more out of me, my heart rate, my breathing, and other things in general, walking upstairs, all these things collectively. Now, we know if I can take that off and I can get in shape, even by going for walks and even by doing social activities, playing sports with family. Not to say we all want to go out there and be in prime athlete shape. When I talk about getting in shape in corporate level, I don't reflect on some of the athletes I work with, world's best athletes, and people think, well, you work with some world's best athletes and sports people, it's almost impossible to replicate that, because that's their job. And it would be, for the most part, I would think, if you're working full time. But what I would say, be the best you can be, and take that 5-10 kilo off if you can, or 20 pounds gradually, and you're on the way. And one of the biggest things I find is that people get it off, but then they bring it back on again. And that happens to all of us. We all do that, because we'll go through stuff in life, and people have babies, they have stress, they have pressure, and so on and so forth. And that's going to happen. The one thing for me is when you keep it off, going to a lifestyle plan. Now, this is the sort of time of year where a lot of people have joined the gym in January. They've been training hard, resolutions, they're going to be this, that, and the other. We see all the time, by now, pretty much 90%, if you follow the stats, what they say out there, they'll have given up. Now, one thing that strikes me about you is that the clients that you've got, they keep going. The testimonials you get, the way people talk about what you've done, the work that you do with people, and you show me the stuff that you do. How do you keep that person going, Colin? And what knock-on effect does it have on their life? With the woman or the man in January, they come to Colin for some sessions and they get into some good shape. Okay, no, we're not looking at miracles. We know you're not going to lose 20 pounds in a month. It's going to take time, but you can lose maybe a pound a week or so. Now, as they're gradually doing that, and as they're gradually getting better, what do you do to keep them going, and what's the knock-on effect in their life? What impact does it have on their life to get themselves in shape and change their mindset? And how do you get them to keep going?
Yeah, it's varied, and it is difficult, and I say that respectfully, and I've had the fortune to work with some incredible people and share their success, and equally I've worked with people who I tend to find, I think, thinking about my clients as a group, I think they tend to fall into one of three categories. I would say that there are those people that I work with, and they come with intention and idea, and they know where they want to go, but for whatever reason, I'm the wrong coach, or it's the wrong time, or it's the wrong program, right time to move things forward, and that's okay. We accept that. The second category, I'd say, are those that come, and yeah, it's the reason, it's the right time for them, you know, motivation, desperation, something's got them where they are, and they've identified a need, and they have some success, and I'm fortunate if I'm a part of that. I think I try and instill in everybody that I work with, that I heard very early in my coaching career, was set yourself up to win, which sounds basic, but what I see is that people don't. When people come and say, well, take you know, weight loss or aspirational goal, and I'm all for setting the big goals, but perhaps they've overwhelmed themselves from the get-go. As you say, somebody might come and, I want to lose a ridiculous amount in a short period of time, or they overcommit because there's some peer pressure or expectation. Okay, I'll start the gym, I'll come 7 days a week, and I'll be here 2 hours a time, and that's great if that's the right thing for them. But in my experience, that's not the right thing for most people, unless they're a professional athlete. But the expectation and the assumption that that's what they need to do. So I think for me, it's trying to align that. And as you say, a lot of this starts in the mind, and it's sort of this element of personal mastery in terms of, okay, well, let's bring it back. Firstly, let's set ourselves to win. And as you say, and you know, I've learned a lot of this from yourself, is about, we need to chunk things down and make small
victories goals. Things you can marginalize.
And I think that then makes it more achievable and more attainable, and the closer. And then again, we get into the stuff in and around habit, because that becomes a habit, doesn't it? This small win that feels good, and what I get from that, you know, the endorphin release, the weight loss, or the time, or the goal of a new job, the new relationship, or whatever it is. It's the achievement, it's the accomplishment and the attainment of it. And I think human, you know, looking at what we all do and what we want, it's about progress. I think nothing makes us more happy than when we're making progress. And as you say, that might be a pound a month. It doesn't matter. And for me and the people I work with, this is what I try and instill with our view, with our opinion, the amount of times we do a certain thing, or the amount of times, or the number of things we've reduced to help us. Are we doing something every day to help us toward our goal? I mean, the book, The One Thing, is one for me that had a huge impact in terms of simplifying, because again, in this day and age, with so much going on and so much available, overwhelm is one of the big problems that I see with my clients. So when I try and share this idea of the one thing, and the question that I will often ask them is, what's the one thing that we need to do today, which is borrowed from the book, that's going to help us or bring us closer toward our goal?
Yeah, and it's a mindset, like you says, and I think sometimes you can consciously set goals, and you can use willpower. We know willpower will only take you so far, and willpower is one thing, and you can get up in the morning, and that willpower, it's like putting petrol in a car. Eventually it's going to run out. You've got to put more petrol in the car to go again. But ultimately, if the car is a fault, then you've got to work on that fault on some level, not to compare the mind to the way a car works mechanically, just utilizing that principle. And I think that is going deeper, because I had a client years ago, and she was a high-powered businesswoman, Colin. She was a really high-powered businesswoman, had loads of money, and was a fantastic businesswoman, very academic, very bright, yet she was struggling with a weight issue. And she'd put on a lot of weight, and she was in a situation where it was affecting her work life. Over a period of 2-3 years, she'd put on a considerable amount of weight. Now, she didn't go to bed one night and wake up and she was overweight. It happened gradually. It's that creeping death of a thousand cuts, where you only have to have one chocolate bar more than what you normally have every week. And we know the calories in and out. And I know some calories, without going into too much detail, calorie, but we know obviously that the science is easy. Eat less, exercise more, eat foods with high nutritional values in the way. Her issue was she'd come home at night, and she'd been broken up in a long-term relationship. She'd broke up from a very long-term relationship, and she was really struggling and feeling lonely. And to compensate for that loneliness, she'd raid the fridge and eat all the wrong foods at the wrong time. And as a result of that, she wasn't sleeping well, because she was eating up a certain time, which your body's got to metabolize. which causes issues in terms of sleeping, but more things said and done, those calories weren't going anywhere. The foods were ice cream and chocolate, high in calorie, no nutritional value. Get up in the morning and she was still hungry, in a spiral, and she'd put on a lot of weight, was feeling unhappy about herself. And when I did some regression with her, I regressed her back to find out the emotion and investigate the emotion. And we found that when she was very young, as a 4 or 5-year-old, whenever she'd be upset or hurt, her mum would give her chocolate. She'd equate chocolate with love, and she was trying to find love in food in that situation. So it's that implicit reaction that people have, and it's not easy for people because the media doesn't make it easy. And I know when I was doing a seminar in London once, and I was walking the streets of London in the evening, releasing some cortisol and adrenaline because it'd been a really high-paying seminar, and I'm walking, I see the really big screen, massive screen, and I'm watching this commercial, I'm seeing this advertisement, these girls are drooling over this guy, and this guy's got this like 6-pack, and they're hoisting him high, and they're just drooling over him, and you hear 11:30, 11:30, 11:30, and then you hear the name of the drink, which is sugar and chemicals and whatever rubbish they're put in there. So the implicit association, the anchor in NLP, as you all know, NLP anchoring, the cue, 11:30, arousal, sex arousal. Now, the guy was a window cleaner, and I'm sure people who are old enough will remember that advertisement. We see similar adverts now anyway. So you've got the 11:30 over and over again. You've got this 6-pack window cleaner. Now, I doubt many window cleaners, no offense to window cleaners, do a great job. They're going to look like a Greek Adonis. That's not to say it's a good or a bad thing, but ultimately they're using that to sell. So when the person gets 11:30, they don't know why, but they want that drink. And we're fighting against the elements. So I do feel for people, it's not easy. And some of these groups that they join to lose weight put even more pressure on them. And they put point systems on food, and and what you said was fantastic, where exercise releases endorphins. So for me, if you're exercising, you're not eating, and you don't feel like eating because you got that buzz. If you're exercising properly. Now, exercise doesn't have to be the gym. It can be playing sports with family. It can be doing a number of things. I'm going for a country walk. The UK, I'm back in the UK now. It's beautiful countryside. I got back today and I went for a walk in the countryside, and I thought, this is fascinating. It's so green, and just the environment, it brings you to a state of relaxation. And I think that you take a bit here, Colin, take a bit there, nutrition, sleep, mindset, work on the unconscious mind, and you take from here and everywhere. Then holistically, the big picture of these marginal gains and goals, and you're on the way. And if you keep that lifestyle, because we know life the way it is, it's fragile. You're going to hit these bumps. You're going to go under. We all do. No one's perfect. Life is as much about loss than anything else. But we're in a good place to handle that situation, become more resilient. And I can see your approach as being similar to that, where you work with the person very holistically. You're uncovering every stone. But what I do, and I don't know if you do the same, I go for the small victory, whatever that might be. And that small victory might be lose a pound, it might be do 3 exercise sessions in the week. It might be, and then you build that confidence that you're going somewhere in terms of moving forward. And I think as long as you're going somewhere without pressurizing yourself, focusing too much on the outcome, then I go back to the process. Think of the process, put the goal to one side, and get up in the morning and listen to motivational CDs. Go for that walk, have that juice, have that coffee too, have that cake too. Not deprive yourself. If you want to have it, just stop at that. Stop at 2 biscuits and don't read the whole packet. It's okay to have that. If you beat yourself up more than you can tolerate, you stress yourself out, you have the whole packet anyway. So compassion for self. So your thoughts on your approach in terms of anyone in a situation now. Now, I know each case is on formulation and everyone's different and unique. Now, any tips with anyone out there who is struggling with their weight, if they're struggling to get their game on, if they're struggling to be the best they can be, what can they do to get the ground running? What's one step they can take? One small step for mankind, one big step, so on and so forth. What's one step they can take?
I think I would probably have to give maybe 2 tips there, or two things from experience that I do know seem to have an effect for people. Going back to that earlier, this thing about setting ourselves up to win. think that's the most important frame for anybody, because, as you say, whether it's through the group that people are in, or the program that they're on, or the societal impact, these things can sometimes be such a burden and such a a restricting factor in people being able to make any progress. So just that notion of setting yourself up to win is a great start place. So, and as you say, we can then empower ourselves with the determinant of, well, what's the one thing that I need to do? If it's one thing a day, as you say, go for a walk, because there's multiple benefits. Not an unrealistic or an unattainable goal, one thing. And then you look back on it, potentially over the course of the year, it's 365 wins if I did one thing a day. If I offered somebody that at the end of the year, and said, I can give you a 365% increase, would you take it in improvement, mastery? They're going to say yes. And that's it. It's breaking it down. But if you say that at the beginning of the journey, you'll be changing this, we'll be doing that, it's not going to work for everybody. So I think that setting ourselves up to win is one thing. And I think that from experience working with people, and as you said, I'm really fortunate that I get the opportunity to, not all clients, but quite a lot of my clients to work with over a long period of time, is the fact that, and for me as well, it's a journey. It isn't necessarily once we've achieved, the goal, the result, the time, the weight, the score, the job. That isn't necessarily it. And I learned probably a lot of this from yourself, going around, the goal beyond the goal, and what are we going to do then? And what I found, and I think the reason I've developed the way of working that I do, is people who were coming to work with me on programs or one-to-one with what they believed was the challenge or was the hurdle, but through exploration and me just asking some challenge questions and perhaps peeling the layers of the onion back slightly, it wasn't actually that was the issue. They might come and say, well, yeah, I want to lose a bit of weight. Great, but through some questioning, nothing too intrusive, just some structured, challenging questions on more than one occasion, and I can think of several clients that it was apparent it wasn't about losing weight, as you alluded to before. There were other issues going on, stress factors and other determinants. So that was the cause. And again, it's this, looking at the cause as well, isn't it, rather than the symptom as well. And so through practice and experiment with different clients, I think if an individual, we can look at it and think, this is the surface level, the story that I tell myself, this is the thing that I want to change or improve. Be honest, is it really? We're the easiest person to lie to and say, well, yeah, if I do that, everything will be perfect. We have to be honest with ourselves. Will it really? If I do this and that and I get that, will that be okay? Will that be what I really need here and now? And quite often there's a bit more to it. So I think it's just digging a little bit deeper in my experiment and being willing to do that over a long period. This is a work in progress. So people taking ownership of that and looking at it as a long term, in a good way, not as in a sentence that you have to do all these things all the time. Because if your mind is that anyway, you won't do it. You've got to do it because you want to do it. You can see the benefits that you get from it, and it becomes a way of getting more out of what you do. So that's where it comes from, really.
Yeah, that's interesting stuff, and like you says, it's going for those goals that are attainable and building up gradually. And I think that 365-day analogy is key, because the key is not what you do in one day, and not what you do for 2 weeks a year. It's what you do for the 50 weeks a year, and that's the important thing, consistently. And I think that any plan that anyone has, there's got to be a way for them to adopt as a lifestyle, where a lot of people, they're looking to do the instant gratification. They want to go in there, blast it, and that's the end, and go back to where they were before. And you want to phase into a new lifestyle. It's really a lifestyle change, and it goes against certain amounts of conditioning that people have got in the way they see the world. Because we know that if you have one juice in the morning, or if you eat healthy for one day, you won't be healthy for life. We know that if you do one training session, you're not going to be fit forever. You're going to keep doing it. Same as the mind. And it's this misconception of the mind, where I'm not saying you got to do homework every day. You've got to find ways to whichever ways work for you, to get the mind in a functional place. And for me, I do a lot of meditation, and every day I'll meditate for half an hour. People say to me, well, how do you find the time? I say, if you can't find the time to meditate for half an hour, you need to meditate for 5 hours. That's how imperative it is. It's important to switch off at some point. So if I've done a course and the intensive work I do, sessions as well, there'll be a time in the afternoon where I've got to switch off. It's in the dark room with an audio, or there's no audio, and just be mindful. And sometimes it's easy. It's not easy. People expect to switch off completely. The key is to expand on it. Start with a minute, even 5 seconds, and expand that. Now, some days it's easier than others, and some days it's more difficult. We don't really know why. The mind is complex. There can be many reasons, millions, but the thing is, it's like finding something that works for you. And people say, well, it worked forever. Well, like anything, you just change it. For me, teaching people incantations in the morning to get in the good state, incantation where you put the emotion, the physical gesture, like, you know, with a statement, is one way to now what I do with people is I take a belief that they have, a limiting belief, and they get to write the opposite and do an incantation. Say, if the belief is they're negative at presenting, I can never present this, it'll be, I'm a damn good presenter. Because you've got years of conditioning in your head, we want to override that. So the goal for me, Colin, is get people to have a default state that changes. Because biologically we know we inherit certain traits. Some people nature, some nurture. Me, somewhere in the middle. I don't know how much is nature nurture, but I know biologically, just like anything else we inherit, hair color, eye color, physiology, I'm sure we inherit traits as well. Then you've got psychologically, if you're born into an environment where people are very motivated, then you're going to be potentially more motivated than you would be if you're born in an environment where there's a lack of motivation. Parents don't work, grandparents don't work, then you might follow the same. You might go opposite, but we know statistically we tend to sort of follow our social as well as a big impact. You hang around people who think one way, you're going to adopt their beliefs and values. So there's all these considerations. So I wouldn't be too hard on anyone or them hard on themselves, but realize, accept it for what it is, and then change. And for me, it's building that default mechanism. That's why I do the gratitude list over and over again, because the more you do it, and some days you can't be bothered doing gratitude list, writing all the things you're grateful for, really feeling it. And if anyone else watching out there hasn't done it before, think of something you're grateful for, really feel it. And if that could be a default mechanism, let's say you have a stressful day or some bad news, obviously depending on the news and where we are in that situation, but relatively news throughout the day that we get, say work related, this report's not on time, that's fallen through. If we go to a default of gratitude, now imagine anyone watching out there, if you get some bad news at work, maybe that report's not done, or the presentation went really, really well. If you go to a default of gratitude, you're in a better place to do the next task. So a lot of the work I do, similar to yourself, is broad as is long, where I look at the big picture, emotional awareness, be more aware, be able to put your game head on, and gradually change that default mechanism. Now, there are days that we all have that are write-off. We want to minimize that. For me, some people have years where they're like that, months, days. You want to minimize that, because not all negative emotions are bad. Anger, hate, that can fuel positive action, but we don't want to stay there for longer than we need to. And we know that if you're in a good place mentally, you're going to do great work. And I can see the work that you do with a lot of people works holistically, where you're changing and you're giving people goals that they can attain. If they walk around the block, go for a walk around the park, if they have a better lunch than what they did the day before, and they carry on eating what they normally have until they can change the dinner as well, if they can do meditation once a week. See, so you're not always jumping in the deep end, sink or swim. You extend your comfort zone, but ultimately, if you're going forward, you're on the way. And I think that's fascinating, and I can see how people can become more functional, not just in their personal life, but professional life as well. And that has a knock-on effect. And life being the way it is, we'll never be in a sustained great place, but we want to, whatever place we're in, be able to rise and meet the challenge, to go forward and go from there. But what I find intriguing is you simply widening the radar of the work that you're doing, Colin. What are the next steps for you? I mean, where do you go from here? You've done some great work in sport. You still do great work in sport. You've done some great work with people around the fitness area, and now over the years, you've expanded in corporate sector. Is that a way you're going to go forward? Is that sort of is one we're going to expand on?
Yeah, I think I suppose it's almost gone full circle, really, having been in the corporate game and done that for a long time, to come out of that and to go on this new journey through sport. I've been really blessed that I've been able to work with so many different athletes, young athletes as well, and it's great working with young people because they challenge me as much as I challenge them. Which is great, and it's a different set of issues and things to work around. So the sport, again, and you alluded to earlier, and I think it's a good point, that there are parallels just as much as there are distinctions between sport and business. And some people, I've read people who've talked about they should be kept separate, they're nothing alike, but there are people that would say, clearly we can take bits from different parts, and some people are very pro that. So, but in my experience, I suppose, having been in both camps, I get a flavour and an understanding, and I've had the fortune to work with companies who've been willing to sort of embrace and be open to my way of what I do. And I think going forward for me now, it very much is in, for lack of a better term, the corporate or the workplace, because so many of us are doing it, and I think over the next 5 to 10 years, the way we work will be very different, and stress, expectation, unrealistic expectation, pressure. We don't need to start bringing in the statistics to talk about health conditions and problematic issues if we carry on the path that we are, and it's about ideally for me working with people that want to, and I would always say this to anybody potentially that I've not worked with before. If the question arises, I couldn't go and work with somebody who was having to work with me. It just wouldn't. That's just me. That's a personal thing. So I think the start point is somebody who wants to basically take ownership of these things. And I see a lot of the coaching that I do is not around necessarily me having all the answers. It's more facilitation and me being able to give them, through a staged approach, different resources and tools that they can then go away and use for maybe a couple of months, and then they come back, they check in. Some things will work, some won't. The things that do, we keep. Other things we readdress it. But I've been presented with a number of opportunities sort of going forward. I went to America last year. I'm going back to the US in next month. Following month, I'm going to Malaysia to work with an academy out there, actually, which is a new challenge, but all good, all different, but similar challenges. It's a people challenge, whether it's in academia, sport. For me, and you know this better than anybody, it's a people thing, regardless of what the determinant is, or what the factor or the outlying issues are. We bring it back to human nature and what's going on, and better questions is a big part of it for me. And I think to myself, a lot of the things I do now and I try and share, and that I've studied, learned, read about, and had the fortune to be taught. I think if more people were taught or educated or shown the things that I've learned in the last 10 years, I think things would be very different, and everybody's said that before, haven't they? If I'd have known then what I know now, etc.
Yes.
But I genuinely believe it, and yourself, and you look at cultures, particularly the US, that they're embracing a lot of these things in and around, whether it's the sport, the emotional intelligence, the mindfulness in schools. They're taking a different approach in and around it, and the research and the results, kids that typically would be labeled as difficult or challenged, they're trying different approaches in and around mindfulness and emotional intelligence, and they're getting great results. And a book that some people will have come across, I think I've mentioned it to you before, that shifted my thought around this correlation before, a book called Spark, talks about the benefits to physical activity in an academic, particularly in a school situation, and the impact it can have. And it's very, very interesting. So I'd like to continue my work in and around that side of it as well, because I suppose we'll always need to prove that these things can work, even though it's not an exact science. But going forward, I'd like to think that I can continue to work with young people and organisations that are pro, and they want because we know, you know, an organization's most valuable asset is its people. And when we, and you'll know when you talk to people within the organization, the alignment is sometimes way off in terms of what the owners or the people who own the business believe their people want, need, and are doing, versus when you have conversations with the team, so to speak,
yes,
where they are and what they need, they're completely, you know, misaligned. So
yes,
having the opportunity to go and work with some organizations in different parts of the world will be educational, I'm hoping, for me as well, as much as I can hopefully share some of my ideas that I can learn from other people, and yeah, on my own journey, just to keep progressing, keep studying,
yeah, that's fantastic.
keep reading.
No, definitely, and that's lifelong learning. I think we're always learning. And I went to a seminar last year. When I was speaking at the Best You Expo last year. As you do, you go watch other speakers too. And I went to watch other speakers because I was speaking on that weekend, and I went to watch Clive Woodward speak. He was speaking on a few hours before I was due to speak on the Sunday, and when I watched him speak, he talked about how he used business skills in rugby as well as the other way around. He'd used this skill he'd learned in business, and that really helped him a lot. And I'm sure he'll explain a lot better than me. And I found the seminar really interesting because he talked a lot about how he took the business principles into sport, and that really worked well for him in the seminar. And it was a fascinating seminar and a fascinating insight. And he kindly afterwards let us, or anyone at the seminar, download the presentation, and I read through it. I thought it was fascinating how you can incorporate the two, go hand in hand, like you mentioned there. And he didn't go into too much details in a short time he did the seminar, but from my understanding is that he took some of these skills and organizational skills and skills that they have in business, and I think the two can marry really, really well. And like all things where I was learning, those do things on different level. I utilize that story because it suggests, like you said there, we talk a lot about sport teaching business, but business can teach sport too. And you've got the best of both worlds yourself in terms of having been in both camps really, and been around many other areas as well in terms of working with people like young people who present different challenges to work with. It's gone really, really fast. It's been a fascinating hour. I'm sure we could have carried on, and people watching would probably carry on watching and listening. It's been an awesome hour. I just want to briefly mention that speaking of the Best Expo, I'll be back there on the weekend myself, and it'll be Sunday. I'm speaking again. This year I'll be doing Peak Mental State, and there'll be many other great speakers there as well. I don't know if Sakai's speaking this year. I know he was there last year because I went to see him, but I don't know this year. But there's many great speakers this year, and you can check out details if you want to see who's speaking there, or come check us out. Also, I want to say that I'm doing a seminar with Colin 21st of March. I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be awesome. We're going to combine our knowledge. There's a million years of experience between the two of us. We've been around for a while. So do get down, do email us and come down. It's in Manchester, and check Colin out, check myself out. It's going to be a phenomenal seminar. You can email us for details. Colin will be doing his stuff. I'll be doing mine. If anyone wants to get in touch with you, Colin, what's the best way to do it, mate? What's the best way for them to email you on anything you covered this evening, or just generally fire an email about the work you do, or generally if they're interested in doing some work with you? How can they go about getting in touch?
Sure, yeah. Probably the easiest route is through my website, which is obviously all the W's. It's peakperformanceconsultancy.co.uk. That will then lead people to the other channels, obviously the same, Peak Performance Consultancy on Facebook. It's the Peak State on Twitter. But yeah, all my email and all my details through my website is probably the easiest way to go. And yeah, love to hear from anybody with any ideas, anybody who, collaborations, things that I can learn from them, or people that would be interested in what I do. Yeah, and as you say, looking forward to our workshop, and hopefully a couple more later this year. And yeah, no, I really appreciate your time. Good to talk to you, Jim. Could have kept talking all night. But
yeah, no, likewise. We definitely speak the same language, that's for sure. And it's been fascinating, and I'm sure people out there have got a lot out of it, that's for sure. So I just want to thank you once again, Colin, for coming on board, and thank you for watching out there. The video will be available on YouTube if you want to watch it again. You can get in touch with Colin, myself, anything that we've covered this evening. So thanks again, guys, and until next time, live with passion.
Thank you.